I fucking loved this movie. Let's do it. Late Night with the Devil is about this late night talk show named Night Owls that is hosted by this guy, Jack Delroy. Basically, Jack's whole career in late night has consisted of him competing with Johnny Carson for ratings. So the whole opening scene is like a voiceover explaining Jack's career, like all of his Emmy nominations. And it also mentions that Jack is a member and makes regular visits to the Grove. This is like an elite group of rich and powerful men. It's said to have some like cult or demonic activity. Obviously, it's referencing Bohemian Grove, which is a real thing. It shows some clips of some episodes that he's done, including his highest rated episode, which was with his wife Madeline. And Madeline was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer and ends up dying. And the narrator says that even though this was Jack's highest rated episode, it still did not beat Carson. Due to his wife's death, Jack takes some time away from the show. And in an attempt to boost the show's ratings, Jack decides to do an occult-themed episode on Halloween night of 1977. So basically, the opening frames this as a documentary that attempts to explain the events that happened on Halloween night 1977 on the live episode. And what we see next is that episode. So the episode opens with Jack's production assistant, Gus. And the first guest that Jack brings out is a psychic named Christu. Christu starts to do readings. The first one is a flop, but the second one is actually right, and he pinpoints this mother and daughter, and he knows that their brother/son just passed away of suicide. So he hits that one nail on the head, crowd goes wild. But then all of a sudden, Christu starts to like convulse and his eyes roll to the back of his head. And he starts screaming that there is somebody named Minnie there that needs to get a message to somebody. And this somebody is an unmarried man with a wedding ring. But nobody responds and eventually it passes. The next person that gets brought out is Carmichael, who is like the leader of the skeptic community. He insists that Christu is faking and tries to like rationally explain everything. But then Jack reveals that he does not think Christu is lying because Minnie is actually the private name that he had for his wife Madeline, so he thinks that the message was intended for him. Christu and Carmichael go back and forth a little bit, but then Christu starts getting like visibly ill, and all of a sudden he projectile vomits this black liquid like all over Carmichael, all over the stage. They cut to commercial break and Christu is rushed off to the hospital. And when they come back from commercial, they bring out their next guests. June, who is a parapsychologist, and Lily, who is her latest subject. We find out that Lily is the sole survivor of a mass suicide by the Satanic Church. This specific church worshipped Abraxas, and they talk about how since this, Lily sometimes becomes possessed. Lily explains that she calls the entity inside of her Mr. Wriggles because he wriggles his way into her head. And then the great idea comes up that they should try and conjure the demon. June is really reluctant but ends up agreeing. Before they start this, they cut to another commercial, and during this break, Jack is informed that Christu died in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. Jack doesn't really want anybody knowing, so they don't freak out, so he keeps it to himself. When they come back, June starts the ritual, and sure enough, they are able to summon the demon that is within Lily. When Demon Lily comes out, she looks at Jack and makes it seem like they've met before, and she looks at him and says, "We've met under the tall trees." And she also reveals that June and Jack are sleeping together. And all of a sudden, the chair starts levitating, the lights go haywire, but ultimately June is able to bring Lily back. Meanwhile, Carmichael thinks this is all bullshit and believes that June hypnotized the crowd. And he decides to prove it by then hypnotizing Gus. Gus, along with everybody in the studio, sees like worms squiggling underneath his skin. And in one of the sickest and best uses of practical effects, Gus literally rips his skin open to reveal all of these worms coming out of him. The audience, Jack, everybody thinks they see it too. Until Carmichael snaps him out of it, and then we roll back the tape and see that everybody was just under a group hypnosis and thought that they saw it. But then they go to play back Lily's possession and everybody still sees it, so how the fuck do you explain that, Carmichael? He's also just like really annoying and terrible this whole movie. As they're replaying the footage of Lily, Jack sees something and makes them go frame by frame. And sure enough, he sees the ghost of Madeline standing behind him in one of the frames. This infuriates Carmichael because he's like, "Jack, obviously you've just orchestrated this whole thing for ratings." But he shuts the fuck up real quick when Lily becomes possessed again. Bolts of lightning start coming out of the ceiling. Lily starts levitating again. And this time her head like splits open and there's all this static coming from it. Gus gets up and Lily telekinetically twists his neck and kills him on the spot. She then hangs June by her own necklace and slits her throat with it. And then she just burns Carmichael alive. She literally looks at him and he like spontaneously slowly combusts. So now we're left with Jack. And Jack is now thrown into this nightmarish version of his talk show. So we see the clips that we had seen earlier, but it's like Jack is now reliving it. And then we also find out that Jack does have a connection to Lily. And it's because he encountered the demon that is possessing her during a ceremony at the Grove. And we also learn that his involvement in the Grove pretty much caused Madeline's death, because in return for the success of his show, his wife was sacrificed. Jack is then confronted by Madeline's spirit, who is like laying in a bed, bald, sickly. My interpretation of that is that her soul is still suffering even after she's dead because he sacrificed her for his success. Jack goes to her, and on the bedside table, there is this ritualistic dagger that June had brought to the show. And Madeline begs Jack to put her out of her misery with it. And Jack does it. He proceeds to stab Madeline with this dagger. However, he comes to and realizes that he's actually stabbing Lily. Jack stands up surrounded by an empty studio and the bodies of all of his dead guests. And he just repeatedly says, "Dreamer, here awake," which is what Carmichael said earlier to snap everybody out of the hypnosis. But Jack's not snapping out of it. This is really happening. And he just repeats that as we hear police sirens growing in the distance.